Good evening, all of you. In the last session, we discussed about how to launch EC2 instance with Linux OS using AWS data center. AWS is maintaining data centers to provide the ready-made infrastructure for the businesses. To provide the ready-made infrastructure for the businesses, AWS providing the infrastructure which is maintained by data centers. Got it? Now, here we have seen already how to launch one EC2 instance with the Windows operating system, and we have seen how to launch one EC2 instance with the Linux operating system. Okay, if you launch EC2 instance with Windows operating system, you can connect to that by using RDP application. One Windows application can connect to another Windows application by using RDP application. RDP nothing but remote desktop connection. Okay, now when we are connecting to or when we are launching EC2 instance, EC2 service will ask you to download key pair. What is key pair in the EC2 that we discussed in the last session? AWS is providing key pair when we are launching EC2 instances. The key pair is the combination of public key and private key. Public key will be available in AWS EC2 and we will download that private key. What is the purpose of this public key and private key? Using this public key and private key, we can connect to our EC2 instance securely. There will be a security for our EC2 instance. Whoever want, they can't connect to our EC2. If they want to connect to the EC2 instance, they need to have our private key, because when you try to connect with EC2 instance, you need to send the private key to the EC2. Private key will be compared with the public key. If those keys are matching, then only EC2 will allow you to connect. Otherwise, it will reject your connection. So to provide the security for the EC2 instances, AWS introduced a concept called key pair, public key and private key. Public key will be available with EC2, private key we will download. Okay, fine. Now here I'm launching one EC2 instance with Ubuntu OS. Ubuntu is one of the Linux flavor, Linux distribution. Linux having so many distributions. Ubuntu is one of the Linux distribution. I have launched one EC2 instance with Ubuntu OS in AWS data center in Mumbai region. In India, Mumbai is one region. Mumbai is the only one region which is available in the India in the AWS. In that Mumbai region, we have 3 data centers. Okay, 1A, 1B, and 1C. In Hyderabad, they are planning to start one more region, but that is coming soon. We don't know exact date. Fine. EC2 instance is running in the data center, and I have my personal computer which I am using to take the classes for you. Now, when I have launched that EC2 instance, I have downloaded a key pair. Now I want to connect to my EC2 instance to perform the operations. EC2 instance is having Linux OS, that is Ubuntu OS. My application is having Windows OS. My system is having Windows OS. How can I connect from Windows machine to Linux machine? That's where we are using one third-party software called Putty. We are using one third-party software called Putty. Putty is acting as a mediator between our Windows computer and EC2 Linux computer. Okay. Now here, when we go for Putty, we need to give the private key for the Putty. Then Putty will talk to EC2 instance. But unfortunately, when we download the key pair, we got the key pair in the PPK format. We got the key pair in the PPK format. Sorry, PEM format. Whenever we download the key pair, we got the key pair in the PEM format. Putty cannot understand the PEM file. Putty will understand the PPK file. So for that, we have used Putty Gen software to convert PEM file to PPK file. We are using Putty Gen software to convert the PEM file to PPK file. I have given the PPK file as an input for the Putty. IP address of the EC2 instance and PPK file I have given as an input for the putty. This putty I have installed in my Windows machine. This putty I have installed in my Windows machine only. Got my point? In this Windows only, I have the putty. I opened putty. I have given the IP of the EC2 instance. I have given PPK file, which I have converted from the PEM file. Then putty able to connect with my EC2. Now I can perform the operations on the EC2. EC2 is a Linux machine for us now. EC2 instance is a Linux machine for us now. This is what we have covered in the last session. Are you guys comfortable with this? What we discussed in the last session? In the real time also, we will use putty only to connect, guys. In the real time also, we will use putty only to connect. In the real time, if you are using AWS cloud in the project, definitely you will use EC2 instances with Linux OS. But for your operations, you will have a computer with Windows OS. To connect from the Windows OS to Linux OS, you will use EC2. I mean, to connect to the Linux OS, you will use putty software only in the real time also. Sunil, did I answer your question now? Yeah, good. All of you comfortable? What I have explained as of now? All of you comfortable with what I have explained as of now? Yeah, perfect. Now, so we are able to launch EC2 instance. We are able to connect to the EC2 instance by using putty. The EC2 instance is a Linux. Okay, most of our work as a DevOps engineer, not most, all of your work will be on the Linux OS only. As a DevOps engineer or as a AWS engineer, your job will be on Linux operating system. You need to work with Linux operating system. So we have already discussed about Linux operating system. Linux OS came into market in the year of 1991. Which company developed Linux operating system? Which company developed Linux operating system? Come on. Linux OS developed by not any company. It is developed by Linus Torvalds, not Sun Microsystem, guys. Sun Microsystem developed Java. Linus Torvalds is one student. Linux OS developed by one student. His name is Linus Torvalds at that time. Linus Torvalds was the name of the Linus Torvalds is the name of the person who developed our Linux operating system. Linux is free and open source. Linux OS is free and open source. Source code is also available. It is free of cost. That means you no need to pay the money to use the Linux. At the same time, the source code is also available. So many companies, so many people taken Linux OS source code and redesigned it and released into market with their brand names. These are called as Linux distributions. Linus Torvalds developed this OS. So many people copied his code and modified the code according to their requirement. They released into market. These are called as Linux distributions. Linux having more than 200 distributions, guys. Linux OS is having so many distributions. Linux having more than 200 distributions. Those many flavors of Linux is available in the market. Almost all the companies copied the code of the Linus Torvalds. They redesigned that code and released into the market. So whatever they have redesigned and released into the market is called as Linux distribution. What are some of the Linux distributions that we know? Ubuntu is one of the Linux distribution. CentOS is one of the Linux distribution. RHEL, one of the Linux distribution. Fedora is one of the Linux distribution. SUSE is Linux distribution. Kali Linux, that is also one of the Linux distribution, etc. Like this. There are so many distributions are available for the Linux OS. So you can use one of the distribution for your project based on the requirement. Okay, Linux is multi-user based operating system. Linux is multi-user based operating system. What is the meaning of multi-user based operating system? Multiple users can connect to single Linux machine at a time. Multiple users can connect to one Linux machine at a time. One Linux machine at a time. Now, multiple users can connect to one Linux machine at a time. That's the reason Linux is called as multi-user based operating system, whereas Windows is single user based operating system. Linux OS is highly secured. Linux OS is highly secured when compared with Windows. When compared with Windows OS, Linux OS is highly secured. So this is the introduction part for the Linux we discussed in the previous sessions. Linux OS came into market in the year of 1991. Linux OS developed by one student. His name is Linus Torvalds. Linux OS is free and open source. Open source code is available in the internet. Linux source code available in the internet. Source code also available. Source code also available in internet. Anybody can take the Linux source code. They can modify according to their requirement. So many people already taken the Linux OS source code and redesigned it and released into market with their brand names. Those are called as Linux distributions. There are 200 plus distributions are available for Linux. Some of the famous distributions are these: Ubuntu, CentOS, RHEL, Fedora, SUSE, Kali Linux. These all are called as flavors of the Linux, or we can say them as the distributions of the Linux. Linux is multi-user based operating system. Multi-user based operating system. What is the meaning of multi-user based? Multiple people can connect to the Linux at a time, can perform multiple operations. Multi-user based operating system which supports for multitasking. Multiple users can perform multiple actions. One user can perform multiple actions. Okay, and coming to the security, Linux is highly secured when compared with Windows operating system. Perfect. Now, coming to Linux architecture. Before jumping into our work in the Linux OS, we need to understand how this Linux operating system designed. What is Linux OS architecture? What is Linux OS architecture? Linux architecture. Good. Linux OS contains several layers, guys. Linux OS divided into multiple layers, or we can say there are several layers available in Linux OS. Guys, why I'm spending some time for the Linux is tomorrow in the company you are going to work with the Linux OS only. So you need to have the clear picture on the Linux OS. Okay, now Linux OS, that is the operating system, right? Operating system means what? Operating system is going to act as a mediator between the user and the computer. Operating system is going to act as a mediator between the user and computer. Okay, now for every computer we will have some hardware, right? RAM will be available, CPU will be available, memory, RAM, CPU, memory, storage, like this. Some hardware components will be available for every computer. Hardware components will be available for every computer. Got it. Now let's assume that this is hardware of the computer. This is hardware of the computer. Now, in order to perform operations with this hardware, there is a concept called kernel. Kernel is one of the main important component in the Linux OS. Kernel is one of the main important component in the Linux OS. That means if you want to run one program, if you want to store some data into hardware, in the hardware components are there. If you want to tell some instructions to the hardware, in the Linux, there is a concept called kernel. Okay, we cannot communicate with the kernel directly. On top of the kernel, they have provided shell. Shell is going to act as a mediator between user and computer hardware component. Shell is going to act as a mediator between user and a hardware component. Shell is going to act as a mediator between kernel is going to act as a mediator between hardware and shell. Shell is used to execute our commands. Shell is used to execute our commands. Whenever we execute a command in the shell, then it will talk to kernel. Kernel will talk to hardware. Now, on top of the shell, our applications will execute. On top of the shell, our applications will execute, or our commands we are going to execute. We will execute our commands, or we will execute our applications. Okay, our application will be talking to shell, shell will be talking to kernel, kernel will be talking to hardware. This is called as Linux architecture, guys. This is called as Linux architecture. Are you able to understand this? Okay, now first of all, what is the meaning of this hardware? What is the meaning of this hardware? Hardware consists of all physical devices attached to the system. Hardware consists all the physical devices attached to the system. What are the examples for hardware devices? What are the examples for hardware devices? For example, hard disk, RAM, motherboard, CPU, etc. These all are called as hardware components of the system. These all are called as hardware components of the system. Hardware consists all the physical devices attached to the system. For example, hard disk, which is used for storing. Hard disk, RAM, motherboard, CPU. These all are the physical devices we are attaching to the computer. They are called as hardware components of the system. They are called as hardware components of the system. Now you can say keyboard, mouse. These are all also hardware components only. These all are the hardware components only. Next one, kernel is the core component of Linux OS. Kernel is the core component. Core means very important. Kernel is the core component of Linux OS, which interacts with the hardware directly. Kernel is the core component of Linux OS, which will interact with hardware directly. Kernel is the core component of Linux OS, which will interact with the hardware directly. Are you guys getting my point? Hardware consists of all the physical devices attached to the system. For example, hard disk, RAM, motherboard, CPU. Now, so here I want to store some data into computer. What we will do? Can we directly interact with the hard disk? Can we directly interact with the hard disk? No. On top of the hard disk, kernel will be available. Kernel is the core component of the Linux OS, which will interact with which will interact with the hardware components of the system. Now, what is the shell? What is the shell? Shell is the interface between users and kernel. Users will execute a command. Then shell will take that command. Shell will give that command and will give instruction to the kernel. Kernel will interact with the hardware. Shell is the interface. Shell is the interface which takes input from user and sends instructions to kernel. send instructions to kernel and it takes output from kernel and sends to user. Sends to user. So user will give the input to the shell. Shell will give the instruction to the kernel. Okay. And it will take the output from the kernel. It takes output from kernel and sends to user. Result back to the user. Result back to the shell. Shell is the interface which takes input from user and sends instructions to kernel, and it takes output from kernel and sends to user. Are you able to understand the role of the shell here? What is the role of the shell here? Yeah. Now next one is applications. What is the meaning of applications? What is the meaning of applications? Applications are the utilities. Applications are the utilities which runs on the shell. Which runs on the shell. For example, browser is one application. In our computer, we are going to use browser. Example, we can say browser. Browser is one application. Text editor, notepad, something like this. Text editor, media player. I want to play one movie. For that, we need a player. Okay, these are all the things are called as applications which we are going to execute in the operating system. Applications, these are we are going to execute in the operating system. Applications we are executing in the operating system. Are you guys able to follow this? What is Linux architecture? Are you guys able to follow this? What is Linux architecture? Linux architecture looks like this. First of all, what is hardware? Hardware nothing but physical devices that are attached to a computer. Hard disk will be available, RAM will be available, motherboard will be available, CPU will be available, keyboard will be available, mouse will be available. All these things are called as hardware components of the system. Now, in the Linux OS, kernel is available. Kernel is the core component of the Linux OS. Kernel is going to talk to hardware components directly. Kernel is going to talk to hardware components directly. Then who will tell to kernel to talk to hardware component? Shell is available in the Linux. Shell is the interface which it takes input from user and sends instructions to kernel. And whatever the output that kernel is giving, it will send that output back to the user. That means shell is acting as a mediator between the user and the kernel. Kernel will give instruction to hardware. Okay. Now, in this Linux OS, we will be using our applications. That means I will take a Linux OS. In that Linux OS, I will install one browser. I will install one text editor. I will install one media player. I will be running some applications. When I use application, it will talk to shell. Shell will talk to kernel. Kernel will talk to hardware. Is this clear, guys? How the Linux is designed by Linus Torvalds? Are you able to understand how the Linux is designed by Linus Torvalds? Perfect. Perfect. Good. So with this, we understand what is Linux. With this, we understand what is Linux OS. With this, we understand what is Linux OS. So shell is the outer layer of the Linux operating system. Shell is the outer layer of the Linux operating system. Whatever the commands we will give to the shell will give that instructions to kernel. That is the very core component of the Linux. That is the very core component of the Linux. Got my point? Got my point? Now, next one is, after the Linux architecture, we need to understand Linux file system. We need to understand another thing is Linux file system. In Linux, everything is treated as a file only, guys. In the Linux, everything will be treated as a file only. What is the Linux file system? In Linux, everything will be treated as file only. In Linux operating system, everything will be treated as file only. In Linux, everything will be treated as a file only. Fine. In Linux, files are divided into three types. In Linux, everything is treated as a file. All files in the Linux OS are divided into three types. All the files in Linux OS are divided into three types. First one is called ordinary files. Second one is called directory files. Third one is device files. First one is called ordinary files. Second one is called directory files. And third one is called as device files. Got my point? Now, what is the meaning of ordinary files? The files contains data. The file which contains the data directly, they are called as ordinary files. For example, .txt files, or image files, or audio files, or video files. They are called as ordinary files. The files which contains the data directly. The files which contains data directly are called as ordinary files. What are the examples? Text files. Binary files. Nothing but images, audios, and videos. These are all called as ordinary files. Text files, binary files. Binary files, nothing but images, audios, and videos. These all comes under ordinary files only. Okay. Next one, directory files. Directory files, nothing but folders. Folders are called as directory files. In the Windows, we will call them as C directory or C folder, E folder, D folder. Drives will be there now. Here we will call them as directories. Directory files are nothing but folders. Directories will be represented as a file. Directory is also, folder also will be represented as a file. Directory files, nothing but folders. Directory files, nothing but folders in Windows. Directories in Linux, directory files in Linux, nothing but folders in Windows. Now you can create a folder now. For example, you want to store DevOps AWS class nodes. Like this, you can create one folder. Inside that folder, you can store the data. You can create one folder, and inside that folder, you can store the data. In the Windows, you will create a folder. In the Linux, we'll call it as a directory. Got my point? Next one, device files. In the Linux, every device also will be represented as a file only. Device files. In Linux, every device is represented as a file. In Linux, every device will be represented as a file. In Linux, every device will be represented as a file. By using this file, we can communicate with the device. By using device files, we can communicate with the devices. Okay. By using device files, we can communicate with the devices. Okay, sir, you are saying that there are three types of files in the Linux OS. In the Linux, everything will be represented as a file only. All the files we are categorizing into three types. First one is ordinary files. Second one is directory files. Third one is device files. How can we check it? When I look at a file, how can I understand whether it is a device file, whether it is a directory file, or whether it is an ordinary file? How to check the file type? How to check the file type? Now see here, how to check file type in Linux. Everything will be represented as a file only. Then when I look at the files, how can I understand whether it is an ordinary file or whether it is a directory file or whether it is a device file? To check this, we will use ls command, ls-l. To check the type of the file, we will use ls-l command. It will list, ls means list. It will display everything which is available in that directory. We will use ls command with -l option to display all files with its type. We will use ls-l command. What is the name of the command, guys? We will use ls-l command to display all files with its file type. We will use ls-l command. It is going to display all the files with the file type also. How can we identify this file belongs to ordinary file, or this file belongs to device file, or this file belongs to directory? Okay, if a file name, the first character, whenever we are displaying a file, the first character will represent. ls-l command will display all the files now. The first character of the file, will represent, the first character represents type of the file. The output, ls-l command will give the output, right? In the given output, first character represents file type, D represents directory file, D represents directory file, hyphen D represents directory file mean directory. D represents directory. If we have a small hyphen, represents ordinary file or nothing but normal file. Normal file represents ordinary file, or we can say normal file. L will be available. That is called as link file. One file is have link address. Link will be available. Represents link file. Like this, whenever we execute ls-l command, ls-l command, it is going to display the files with its types. If first character is D means that is a directory file which is equal to folder in the Windows. Hyphen is there, that means it is ordinary file. L is there, L represents it is a link file. Okay, can we connect to our EC2 and can we check it? Is it working or not? Can we connect it to our EC2 and can we check it? Is it displaying the file types or not? Fine. Let me log in into my AWS console, AWS management console. I will log in into AWS management console, logging in as root user. Captcha DH6D4M. Password. Sign in. Yeah. I logged in into my AWS management console. Go to EC2 dashboard. Are there any EC2 instances available in my account? Yes, there is one EC2 instance. What is the current state of the instance? Is this instance running or it is stopped? Is this instance running or this instance is stopped? This instance is stopped. Guys, this instance is stopped currently. If I want to delete this instance completely, then I will go for terminate. Terminate means it will be deleted completely. Stop means instance will be available, but it will be in the stopped state. Now, every day, instead of creating a new instance, once our work is completed, I will stop my instance. Okay, terminate means delete the instance completely. Again, when you want the instance, you need to create again. So if you terminate the instance, you have to create it again. Okay, today if I terminate, for tomorrow class again I have to create the instance. So it is a time waste, right? Time waste process. Now creating instance every day. 10 minutes it will take. Every day I have to waste 10 minutes to create the instances. Do you want that approach? Do you want me to terminate every day? No. So what I have done is the instance which I have launched in the last session, I have just stopped it. Now I want to start it. Click on start instance. Click on start instance. My instance is getting started now. My instance is getting started. Once my instance is started, can I connect to this instance by using putty? Once this instance is started, can I connect to this instance by using putty? Yes, we can connect it to this instance by using putty software. Instance state is still pending. It is getting started. Here you can see public IP of our instance. You can see the public IP of our instance, and I'm having that key also. I'm having the key pair also, which we have downloaded. Linux VM key pair PEM is available. Linux VM private key.ppk is also available. Okay, now let's wait and see state of the instance. Instance state is running, guys. Instance state is running. Now, can I connect to this instance? Can I connect to this instance from putty? Yes, we need this IP. Okay, open putty. Putty gen not required because already I have generated the private key. I'm giving the IP SSH auth browse load ppk files Linux VM private key.ppk. Click on open, accept it. Login as Ubuntu. My instance username is Ubuntu. Yes, my key authenticated. I have given the private key to putty. Putty connected to EC2 instance. EC2 having public key. My private key and public key compared and they got matched. As my private key and public key got matched, I'm able to connect to my EC2 instance by using putty. Okay, chalo, clear it. Who am I? What's my username? I logged in into Linux machine with Ubuntu username. Ubuntu is the username of the instance. PWD, present working directory. Currently in the Linux machine, I am inside Ubuntu folder. Ubuntu folder available in the home folder. Home folder, I mean, we cannot say folders here. We need to say them as directories. Currently, I am in which directory? Ubuntu. Ubuntu is available in which directory? Home directory. Home is available in which directory? Root directory. Inside the root, we have home directory. Inside the home directory, we have Ubuntu directory. Okay, I want to see what are the files available in the Ubuntu directory. For that, I will use ls command. Ls represent a list, display everything which is available inside the directory. Ls. Can you see that? AWS, DevOps, f1.txt, f2.txt. This is the content which is available inside the Ubuntu directory, which we have created in the Friday session. Let me increase the font size. Full screen only I'm using. Yeah, clear this. Okay, now I'm executing ls command. When I execute ls command, what is happening? When I'm executing ls command, what is happening? AWS is displaying, DevOps displaying, f1.txt displaying, f2.txt displaying. But can you tell me what is this AWS? What is this DevOps? What is this f1? What is this f2? What is this f2? Can you understand what is this here? You cannot. What is the command that we need to use to understand these details? What is the command that we need to execute? to check the type of the files? Can I execute ls-l command? ls command is just displaying what is inside that current directory. Now go for ls-l. Now you can see. Now you can see the AWS. What is the first character of the AWS? D. What is the first character of the DevOps here? D. D represents it is a directory. Nothing but AWS is one folder. DevOps is one folder. f1.txt is having a hyphen. What is the meaning of hyphen? What is the meaning of hyphen? Ordinary file which will contain the data. Ordinary file which will contain the data. L represents link file. Do you have any link file here? We don't have any link file. We'll talk about the link files in the coming sessions. How many types of files available in the Ubuntu directory now? How many types of files available in the Ubuntu directory now? 2 types of files available. There are 2 directory files available. There are 2 ordinary files are available. Ordinary files will represent with hyphen. That means they will contain the data. Ordinary files means they will contain the data. Now D, if it is starting with D, that means it is a directory. Directory nothing but a folder in the Windows. In the Windows we'll call them as folders. In the Linux we'll call them as directories. Are you guys clear with this one? Are you guys clear with this one? Good, good. Now Linux architecture, applications, shell, kernel, hardware. Okay, now guys, can I create one more file? Can I create one more file in the Linux? That means I want to store some file. I want to create one file. For that I am using what? Touch command. For that I am using what? Touch command. Touch f3.txt. Touch f3.txt. That means what I am doing here? I am executing a command by using shell. It is a terminal. It is a shell. I am executing a command. I am an end user. I am talking to the shell. What shell will do? What that shell will do? Shell will create the file, or shell will talk to kernel. Shell will create the file or shell will talk to kernel. I am executing a command. Touch f3.txt. Touch f3 means create a file. I am executing a command by using touch command. I want to create a file. Touch f3.txt. Where I am executing that command? In the shell. Then what shell will do? Shell will talk to kernel. What kernel will do? It will talk to hardware. That is what is going to happen here. Touch f3.txt. File is created. File is created. Can we check it? The file is created or not? ls-l. Wow. f3.txt file is created. Now this f3.txt is a ordinary file or it is a directory file. f3.txt is a ordinary file or it is a directory file. Ordinary file. How can we understand that it is a ordinary file? It is starting with hyphen. It is starting with hyphen. Okay. Now I'm going to make one directory, mkdir Linux. Mkdir Linux. What is the meaning of mkdir? Create one directory, make directory. Mkdir means make directory. Mkdir means make directory. Can we check it? The directory created or not? ls-l. Wow. Can you see this? Linux. Linux is an ordinary file or Linux is a directory file. Linux is an ordinary file or Linux is a directory file. Linux is a directory file. So to create the directory, what is the command we are using here in the shell? Mkdir is the command. Now I want to delete that directory, guys. I want to delete that directory. Then what we need to do? What we need to do to delete a directory? What is the command to delete the directories? To create the directory, we are using mkdir. Similarly, we can delete the directory now. How can we remove the directory? rmdir, remove directory. rmdir Linux. rmdir Linux, ls-l. Do you have Linux directory or Linux directory got deleted? Linux directory got deleted. Simple. If you go for Windows, then what we will do? If you go to Windows, then what we are going to do, guys? When we go for Windows, what we will do? Ashok IT 01 DevApps. What we will do in the Windows? What we will do in the Windows? I want to create a folder. Right click, new folder. Right click, new folder. Okay, I want to delete that folder. Right click, delete. That means in the Windows, GUI is available. In the Windows, what is available? GUI. You right click on your mouse, you choose new option, you choose a folder option, one folder is created. If you want to delete that folder, you right click on this folder, there is an option called delete. That folder got deleted. Right click on this folder, click on delete, that folder got deleted. So how we are doing those operations in the Linux? Through shell. mkdir is the command to create a directory or to create a folder. rmdir is the command to delete that folder. In the Windows, we are doing by using graphical user interface. In the Linux, we are doing by using CLI, command line. Okay, guys, fine. So with this, you got the concept of Linux architecture. Applications will be available. Applications will be talking to the shell. Shell will be talking to the kernel. Kernel will be talking to hardware. Fine. In the Linux, whenever you want to work with Linux, if you want to work with Linux, you need to understand Linux file system. In Linux, everything will be treated as a file only. So all the files, even the folders also will be treated as a files only. They are called as directory files. Everything will be treated as a file only. Everything will be treated as a file only. Okay, ordinary files, directory files, device files. The files which contains the data directly, they are called as ordinary files, text files, binary files, images and all. Directory files in Linux, nothing but folders. Directory files, nothing but folders. Right, next one. How can we check that? Whether the file, what is the type of the file? How can we check that? How can we check that? These files are belongs to which type? ls-l command. ls-l command. Now, next we need to understand Linux file system. Linux file system. Okay, Linux file system structure. How many files are available in Linux? What is the structure of the Linux file system? That we have to understand. How can we understand Linux file system? How can we understand Linux file system? Now, go here. Currently, what is our present working directory? Home Ubuntu. Let's go to previous directory. cd space double dot. I'm going to home directory. ls-home. Inside the home directory, I have only Ubuntu directory. cd space double slash. Now I have been to root directory. ls-l. Oh, these all are the directories available in the Linux. These all are the directories available in the Linux. What is my present working directory? Slash, it represents root directory. Linux file system will be represented as a tree structure. Linux file system will be represented as a tree structure. Root. Inside the root, we have these many files. Okay, can you see how many types of files available here? Can you see how many types of files available? Two types of the files available. What are those two types of the files? Do you have any normal file here? Do you have any ordinary file here? No. What type of files available in the root? Link files available, directory files available. Link files available and directory files available. In the tomorrow session, we are going to understand what is the purpose of these files which are available in the root directory of the Linux. We are going to start the Linux from root directory. In the root directory, there are several link files available and there are several directory files available. What is the purpose of these files and where we are going to store our files in the Linux OS, that we will discuss in the tomorrow session. Are you guys able to understand? Are you guys able to understand the Linux architecture, Linux file system, and how to check a file in the Linux? In Linux file system represents tree structure. Linux file system represents tree structure. All the files will be represented in the tree structure. So in the tomorrow session, we will understand all these files. In the tomorrow session, we will understand all these files. What is the purpose of these files? Which file we are going to use? Why these many files given by the Linux? I will discuss them in the tomorrow session. You got my point? Yeah, in Putty, I will increase the font size also, guys. Don't worry. I will increase the font size. Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll upload this class notes into our website. We'll connect again tomorrow. If anybody has not done the Linux setup, please follow the document which I have shared in the Telegram group. You can see in the Telegram, the messages are pinned already. If you see the pinned message, all the PDFs available. You can go through those PDFs and you can set up your documents. You can set up your machines with Linux OS. We'll discuss from tomorrow. We are going to work with Linux OS from the tomorrow. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. Fine, guys.